Welcome to Astro Chat with Anne Sundell, Kimberly Williams, and Monika Anna. We are three professional astrologers living in three separate countries, coming together every new and full moon to share our 3 points of view on astrology. Whether you enjoy deep dives into the current transits or you are just beginning to learn about astrology for the first time, there is a place for you here. All that is required is an appreciation for astrology, along with respect for the various traditions within it. So grab a mug of coffee, your favorite cup of tea, or any other beverage of your choice, and join us for a chat on the astrology of the next 2 weeks. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another week of Astro Chat. Today it's myself, Kimberly Williams, and the other half of the dynamic duo is Monika Anna, and we are looking at the upcoming full moon in Leo happening on February 12th. Here in the States, that's in the morning, 7:53. Over across the pond, it's 1:53 in the afternoon, and in Finland, 3:53. And as always, please convert that to your time zone wherever you're at so you can follow along and join us. We've had a lot of exciting things happen since our 2 weeks ago when we met up last time, but we're going to streamline this one and just talk about those things near and dear to our hearts, or at least capturing our interest. Let's start off by diving into talking about the energy of a full moon in Leo in general. The moon in Leo, Leo gets a lot of airtime being a lovely, exciting fire sign. It gets talked about a lot, but I don't think there's as much conversation about a moon in Leo. The moon being our body, being our emotions, being our unconscious. I think it lends a slightly different flavor to that Leo energy. The thing that is always interesting to me is how, at its highest form, purest form, Leo is about living life from the heart, I think. There's something about the Leo energy of being able to give someone the shirt off their back, of being able to convert the most humdrum event into a party. The idea of life is full of joy and we need to live it, and we need to live it large. When I think about Leo, I think of the bonfire on the beach that's blazing and it's big and you can see it from a distance and everyone is drawn into it. There's charisma, there's curiosity, there's things that attract us. But that also takes a lot of energy to fuel, right? It takes a lot of logs to keep that fire going. And so when we start talking about the moon and we talk about our emotions and our inner center, I think about what are the things that feed your soul, feed your creativity, feed your inner child, feed those parts of you that are very Leo oriented. Not necessarily just what do they do, but how do they sustain? How do we not fall into crash and burn? And so a moon in Leo can be a great time to reinvigorate, re-enlighten, get that energy going. I also think about what are the emotional hangups, pitfalls, triggers that would be something a Leo nature might be sensitized to. And for me, there's really 3 things. One is this is not a time when we want to be shamed or called out on the carpet in some way. Leo energy, that part of us wants to be seen, wants to be acknowledged and validated, but doesn't want to be shamed or put down. There's also the we don't want to be ignored. That would be equally upsetting if we're working really hard to be creative, if we're doing something, we're putting our vulnerability out there and sharing this with others. We certainly want it to be appreciated, or at the very minimal least, recognized. And then the last thing is, I think with Leo energy, there can be that ability to get caught up in the enthusiasm, caught up in the moment. A moon in Leo, especially a full moon, whatever is taking our fancy, we can run with it, but there can be the fear of it being too much for others. That idea of we can be enthusiastic, but not too much. I have too much energy and the people around me are tired. I need to tone it down. Those can be things that we are afraid of, sensitized to, or easily hurt by. And I think it can make us sometimes a little more intimidated to jump in and be jubilant and joyous and very Leo like. So these are things I'm feeling the need to balance in my world of letting my heart lead the way, but also recognizing what are the emotions that might make me a little scared or hesitant to do that. And the last thing I'll say before I pass the baton over to Monika is the idea that a full moon almost always invariably brings up shadow, and the opposite side of Leo is Aquarius. So, where we are perhaps afraid of being the other, of not fitting in, of not belonging, of somehow being judged, and as a result, shamed, ignored, or minimized, right? Because we're not doing things the conventional way, the fit in way, although Aquarius is very non conventional, but that idea of we're so afraid it won't fit in or belong that we hold back. So this is a time, I think, to really embrace our creativity and to relish the inner child and to run with that for the day or the three around this full moon. Those are the things that stand out. There's so much more I could say about Leo, but for the sake of time, I'm going to stop there and say those are the things pressing on my mind. And I'm curious to know, Monica, what are you sitting with as you look at the upcoming full moon?
I mean, I agree with you. And the few things that you picked up, the childlike quality of Leo, I always say that this is very often misunderstood in adults because there is a difference between childish and childlike. And Leo can, the shadow side of Leo, the Leo that is not integrated properly, the archetype is not integrated properly, can be very childish, can be very much, look at me, I'm going to throw a tantrum if you're not going to give me my toys or not going to appreciate me or not going to put me in a spotlight. Leo that has that childlike joy, it goes, oh my God, look at the moon, oh, how it's bright tonight in the sky. Oh my God, look at those clouds, aren't they amazing? They have that childlike joy when people just are drawn to it. There's that kind of curiosity about the world. What I love about pure kind of expression of Leo in that form is that looking at the world with that wondrous, I can't pronounce that now, with those eyes that just see wonder. Like the eyes of the child that see, oh my God, the grass is so green, but why is it green? What's happening there? And having that curiosity, very often as an adult, when we live our lives, we lose that curiosity. Everything becomes so mundane and everything becomes so much of a routine that we don't appreciate those little miracles that are happening around us, the child. And I do think that full moon in Leo can bring those things to the surface. Are we childlike? Do we have that joy? Do we have that curiosity? Do we nurture, again, this is a moon we're talking about, do we nurture our own creativity? The idea of like, oh my God, I'm going to taste spices or new herbs or new recipes. And I might just be super creative tonight in a kitchen because I love exploring new things and having that joy around trying something new, like a child, right? Or the negative or the shadow expression of Leo can be, oh, my partner or my child or my mom didn't, or my boss didn't give me enough attention. I'm going to throw a tantrum and show them how awesome I am and how much they do not appreciate me and they are in the wrong. Interestingly enough, both the inner child and the leadership is linked to this archetype. Which again, I love that astrology sometimes speaks to us in so many paradoxes. You would think, okay, leadership is more like Capricorn or it's Saturn's the kind of being very strict and knowing the rules and knowing the structure. But actually, leadership is linked to Leo because we're talking about that true leadership that leads from the heart. How many leaders in your life, especially if you are in a corporate world, that's very prominent there, but also in the world in general or around you in your own life, how many true leaders that are they don't need appointment, they don't need to be CEO, they don't need to be the supervisor. They're the one that you listen. In your group of friends, you might have those leaders that have that aura around them and absolutely love shining, but they are leading from that authentic self. And how many of those leaders would love to, but they're only there in the name. They're only there because they've been appointed and they are so much of a Saturn, which is interestingly actually rules Aquarius, which is the polar opposite to Leo. So this full moon, I think, speaks to that quality of leadership and speaks to what we bring and where is that authentic part of us and how do we lead our lives through maybe some difficulties, in the way that is true to our own heart. Leo 25, which is the Sabian symbol for this full moon, is a large camel crossing a vast and forbidding desert, sorry. And again, for me, it speaks to that ability of knowing oneself, of knowing what resources I have, and being able to walk through a very difficult terrain, whether literally or metaphorically in my life, and knowing that I accumulated enough resources for that journey. And that journey might be difficult, that journey might really test me to the limits, but knowing that I have that resources, that I prepared for the road, and I have everything that I need within me.
Mm, that's beautiful. I like the way you tied that to the Sabian symbol. I also feel like when and I think you shared this with me when we were reading about other people's impressions of the Sabian symbol earlier, before we started recording. But I liked something you shared about the idea of this is also where we are susceptible to the mirage. The idea of what is, when I think about Leo energy and I think about the fire and everything being golden, it's also easy to fall into chasing the shiny object kind of syndrome, can be something that can happen. And for me, that idea of I'm in the desert and I want that beautiful thing I see over there. Do I really want it, or am I creating a
Yeah.
desire? Am I creating a fantasy fiction of what I want to see? Or is it something that's really there? I don't know. I have to sit with that and flush that out more fully, because this was a Sabian symbol that didn't it speak to my heart initially when I first heard it. And I thought, I think that means there's something about my own personal shadow I need to sit with,
Yeah.
either about the Leo or the Aquarius polarity and investigate more. But I'm really drawn to this idea of, is the camel traversing the desert that's very foreboding, or am I chasing and trying to get to that shiny mirage that's not really there?
Yeah, I love that you picked up on that, Mirage, because again, with Leo, we have that quality of celebrities, this
Mm,
kind of standing in the spotlight. And again, how much of that is people shining their authentic talent and just bringing that beautiful generosity of their own spirit and their own talent, which what Leo is all about, share the talents with others. We are all unique, or whether or not that's a mirage that we see when someone's trying to be something that they're not, just for sake of standing in the spotlight. This is where we're talking about Leo authenticity and then Leo shadow with just standing in the spotlight. And again, that polar opposition to Aquarius, when we really appreciate what gifts we bring in Leo, we then contribute to that Aquarian archetype, and actually we're being unique but part of the community. And that's what we need. We don't need community looking and sounding and feeling and everything exactly the same. We need community that brings different gifts, right? We need someone who will grow a food and someone who can cook that food. If you have a community that can grow food but no one can cook, that community is not going to survive, right?
right.
So we are bringing that unique self to be part of the community. But when we're not, when we're literally stepping into that shadow side of Leo and just being someone that we're not, we're creating that void in community that is a mirage. We're stepping into something that is not quite us, and we can't support that shadow within ourselves, and we can't support that mirage within the community. And then community can see, okay, it's not gold, this is not shiny, this is fake. So I like that you picked up on that, Mirage, because I think there is something to it about seeing the fakeness of the gold in that spotlight.
And that's, I think, what was striking to me was the Leo energy can be bright and shiny and, like I said, like the bright flame, the, as you mentioned, the spotlight. There is something innate about Leo that is the brightness and what we want to see, and it has an innate charisma to it.
Mhm.
But if we don't have substance beneath that, is it only charisma? And it's really not genuine, it's not authentic, it's more fake? Or is it that I'm shining something that is truly the substance of who I am, that is unique and authentic? And charisma can be because somebody has a unique idea, point of view that they're shining, Aquarius, Leo polarity, or charisma can just be the ability to attract and to present a false image. Both are can be forms of charismatic people. So I think it is that discerning and being able to see the difference between what is it that I want to be shining or putting the spotlight on and versus the what is the thing that I want to be chasing. All right, so here's our chart of the lunation. And as always, there's a lot we could talk about, but for the sake of time, you and I, Monica and I, were talking earlier about trying to keep this a little bit shorter, and both of us are recording at times that are rather late for us. So each of us are going to focus on our top one or two transits that caught our eye, that really grabbed to us, and that we are working with. I'm going to be looking at the Mars in Cancer, making a square to Saturn in Pisces. And of course, Saturn is not in Pisces by itself. The North Node and Neptune are there as well. But those are the ones I'm going to be focusing the most. Monica, what about you? What do you think we need to mention and what do you want to focus on?
What caught my attention when we were talking is that full moon, so both sun and moon squaring Uranus, which I think is interesting. And then Pluto and Venus are having conversation with each other that feels a little bit private and outside of the other planets. So it feels like they're hiding in another room and having a conversation.
Yeah.
So those are the two things that kind of caught my attention.
All right. Let me close out the chart and then you can start off with the ones that are calling to you if you want.
So we're talking about that authenticity and being true to ourselves with full moon in Leo. For me, that full moon making square to Uranus, which is planet of unexpected, of revelations, of that lightning strikes that both bring the inspiration and an insight, but also sometimes like the Tower card in Tarot, bring chaos and make everything around us fall apart. And I very often think that Uranus bring that unexpected shaking of the ground when we need it. It's not just bringing the shake up for sake of shake up. We're bringing a shake up when we need to shake up all the old fossilized things in our lives, within ourselves, in our society. So Uranus actually speaking to this full moon, I think the shake up and the unexpected will be around, I think, again, going back to what Kimberly, what you picked up on that Sabian symbol, to that mirage of Leo. So we have a lot of Leonian personalities in our lives at the moment, especially on the world stage. There's a lot of Leo characters, if you will, stepping into the spotlight, grabbing for the spotlight, saying, look at me, look how fantastic I am, how amazing I am, and stepping into that leadership role. I think Uranus might bring a little bit of a disruption and a little bit of insight maybe, and shake things up around those characters and say, okay, is it authentic? Does it have a substance? Does it come from the heart? Is the leadership or the celebrity or the person that we put in that role, are they actually coming from the heart? Are they coming from the place of generosity, from the place of joy and curiosity? Or are they coming from that place, like we said, of I just want a spotlight for the sake of spotlight? So I think Uranus might bring a little bit of disruption, give us some insight to what's happening, maybe shake things up and that shake that mirage so that perfect picture that we see might become a blurry, might give us a little bit of an insight into things that are happening behind. And what caught my eye as well in this chart is the Pluto and Venus talking to one another behind the scenes. So it feels like there is a big party. Full moon is very much a feel of let's have a party, let's be together. There's this loads of energy. It feels like Pluto and Venus just went into another room. They might not necessarily close the doors are ajar, but they're having a private conversation. When no one is privy, everyone's going on. Leo full moon is going, yeah, look at me, let's have a party. Uranus goes, let's shake things up. And then Pluto and Venus is just plotting and planning behind the scene. So there is interesting thing there. Where I'm thinking and where I'm going with that is Venus in Aries not necessarily feels comfortable. Venus is a sensual planet. Sexual, yes, but also sensual. Venus is talking to about our five senses, the sense of smell, the sense of sight, the sense of touch. All those five senses that we have, our body, how our body perceives the world, is very much a Venus domain. And interestingly enough, Aries is a masculine sign. So this is the sign when I talk about masculinity, I'm talking about polarity. It's very active masculine polarity. This is not the polarity when sensuality feels comfortable with. Masculinity and sensuality don't necessarily work very well together within our Western world. I always need to make a caveat here because it's not every culture that has a problem with that. But when we think about Venus sensuality, being comfortable with your body, being comfortable with the touch, with the smell, with how the body is, that's very much a domain of women, right? Unfortunately, in our Western society, very often it's the male counterparts that do not feel comfortable in their body. That's we don't see a lot of expression of men feeling comfortable touching other men, hugging other men, having that intimate sensual conversation without sexualizing that. And that's the key with Venus. Not everything has to be sexualized. Having a really good hug, touching one another, we know that actually hugs releases so much of positive hormones and making us feel better. But for some reason, we still feel more comfortable being potentially hugged by a woman than potentially hugged by a man. So there's something in that Western culture when it speaks to that masculine energy and that very outgoing polarity that does not align very well with Venus. And on top of that, we have that conversation with Pluto, which speaks about power and powerlessness. And I wonder if there's a lot more conversation behind the scene, especially around the full moon that we might find out a bit later, around even more restriction to femininity, sensuality, intimacy, and anything that we would put under that feminine umbrella, if that makes sense.
Hmm. That's interesting. I love it when we come together because I get a different point of view. That's not something that where my mind would have gone. But I like how you framed it, and it gives me a lot to think about. It makes sense what you're sharing. I love this discourse where we have different opinions about things.
I feel
For
like I struggle very often to talk about polarity because in our world, the polarity, male and female, has been, I feel, misunderstood and misappropriated. And especially in astrology, very often when we talk about feminine and masculine, we're not talking about men and women. We're actually talking about polarity and energy. And we all have those. Every one of us has Aries somewhere in our chart, regardless of our gender or how we identify. You have that Aries somewhere in your chart. So it's becoming more difficult to talk about nuance and talk about paradoxes because we see everything more and more as black and white.
True. And I also think it's a great conversation. Like someday I'd love for us to have an episode just on that. For me, what stood out with this particular sextile was the fact that the opposite, that rather than, although I totally hear what you're saying about something could be happening behind the scenes, I think at the same time, there could also be something happening in the forefront, that this could be saying women are taking back power, are reclaiming some energy, are organizing something about Venus representing women and either individually or collectively, and the idea of Pluto being power and Venus and Aries. Time for women to stand up, to push back to some of the legislative laws that are may not be something they are aligned with. I'll leave it there. I don't want to go down the political rabbit hole that others may or may not agree with. But this idea of pushing back and reclaiming and standing up for oneself or one's group of people that you identify with could be really interesting. So I'll be looking to see if any of that sort of rises up in the week following this particular full moon. And then there's the one that I'm really curious about, which is the malefics. So I always love to see when Mars and Saturn are in aspect and talking to each other. It intrigues me, especially when it's a harmonious aspect. Two planets that were traditionally viewed as malefics, by today's standards, maybe not malefic, but definitely um, prone to obstacles that need to be overcome. And here we are in a harmonious trine. And I feel like as I look at this, And they're both in water signs. And my thought was, it really depends on how it's speaking to one's personal natal chart. For example, because it is a trine, if you already have people in positions of power or authority, Saturn, who are emotionally supporting you taking action, Mars, that is going to be nurturing, Mars and Cancer, of the things you want to do. If we can take the actions that are nurturing to us or to others, great. There could be more of this and it might flow in a really wonderful way. However, if we're stuck in, I don't know what action to take, I don't know how to nurture, I need to do rather than to wait and grow, which can happen when Mars is in Cancer, if we're feeling that we're hitting obstacles of people in authority not encouraging us to take time and to slow down and to grow, but rather get it done, be productive, then this could be a little more emotionally explosive, where we have the sudden outburst of, I'm tired of having to push up against you. I'm tired of having to overcome this obstacle. Tired of having to get past this wall in some way. Burnout is another thing that comes to my mind. That emotional burnout of there's been too much of I'm committed to the grind. Been reading a lot about grind culture lately, and so that idea of I'm committed to the grind and being productive and succeeding at the job, but how is that feeding me? What am I getting from this? And then on top of the fact that the two of them are engaged in this conversation, a few days after, in thank you for looking it up for me, Monica, but on the 19th, the moon will have moved past, it'll be waning, and it'll be in Scorpio making a grand trine. We'll have a grand water trine between these, and that could actually be where what has begun with this lunation sort of culminates, rises, and the shadow energy that needs to be exploded, released in some way might come to the surface. And then lastly, the reason I feel so drawn to this aspect isn't just the fact that it's the two malefics, but it's also the fact that Mars is more or less stationed. It's only moving a few seconds. It will be going stationary direct later on the 24th of February at this degree, at 17 degrees of Cancer. So we are already holding and tapping into the energy of the release when this retrograde is over. And here we are feeling it while it's making contact to a rather unstable planet, right? Emotional planet, the moon, and to this very restrictive planet of Saturn. So it just to me feels like I've got the bottle of champagne I'm going to open for when Mars goes direct, but I've got my finger on the opening and I'm just shaking it up so that when I let go, who knows what's going to come out. I don't know. How are you feeling about it, Monica? Maybe you resonate differently with it than I do.
I agree with everything that you say. I actually think it aligns very well with that Uranus and Pluto and Venus, because again, when we have Pluto and Venus speaking in conversation and then power and powerlessness gripping at femininity, of course that the Mars and Saturn are in water, which again, the polarity is the yin polarity, if you will. And like I said, sometimes we need probably episode about that because it's so much of the words that we're using, the semantic has changed and the meaning of the word has changed. So it's difficult to express the meaning behind it when everyone's just hearing different things when we speak about this in a very clunky way. But what I do think is that Mars and Saturn in the water signs will express that underlying dissatisfaction and frustration, especially with women.
Mm-hmm.
So again, I do think
Agreed.
that it all aligns very interestingly. Uranus might shake things up and show us that all that shiny leadership is not what we maybe meant to see. We'll see probably some of the power struggles around women issue and the fear of the patriarchal world, very much Aries fears around sensuality and around Venus themes. And I think the Saturn and Mars speaks to that frustration around expressing anger, expressing boundaries, and having those both the boundaries and anger. Boundaries obviously tighten around water, around femininity, around our feelings. And Mars, at the moment, it feels like we can't express healthy anger.
Yeah.
So it
Yeah.
all kind of ties together.
Let's not forget that we're starting to enter the last few months of Uranus being in Taurus, right? It will be ingressing out later this year. And so I feel like perhaps some of the tight aspects or the hard aspects that hit over the next few months that hit that Uranus could have a lot of energy around the what do I need to change. And I was mentioning with you before we started that it's interesting to see Uranus in the middle of the T square because for a while it seemed like every episode that's all we talked about was one the square between Uranus and I don't know a node in Scorpio or something else transiting in Scorpio. There was so much energy. It was so ever present as we were looking at the charts. And now I haven't really felt that. There's been a lot of trines. There's been more harmonious kind of aspects happening. But as we get close to that shift of it wanting to leave, those last few degrees, and we've talked so many times about the last 2 or 3 degrees of a sign, you often feel that pressure build. And so here we have that everything about this chart to me feels like pressure is building. Either over here with the Venus and Pluto, over here with the Saturn and the Mars, over here with the full moon making a T square to Uranus. It's a little unpredictable, but
Yeah.
definitely it is about tensions building. And I think there'll be this, whatever it is that I can't take anymore. It's time that we do something, we stand up to it, we talk back to it, we take an action. It feels very much like a catalyst for,
Yeah.
okay, how am I going to move forward rather than just sitting with this? And that feels very appropriate happening just days before Mars, the planet of action, decides to station direct.
Yes. And I think I love the word catalyst. I think that will be the word for this full moon, the catalyst. If
Yeah.
I switch to our tips and tricks,
Mm.
I will use that word because for me, I think this full moon will be catalyst to look at our authentic self and how we take leadership position in the world. And we all can do that. There is leadership position is not linked to one particular person, the CEO of a huge company. Leadership is something that we do all the time in situations when we need to step in and lead, whether it's our family, our friend group, or the community that we live in. And again, it doesn't mean you have to do that 24/7. Sometimes it's a situation that called for your leadership that you can then hand over. But I think this full moon will be a catalyst for those questions. Where can we take that leadership? And even more, which I would encourage people to journal and really go deep into, where is my fear and where is my courage? To really step into leadership position, I have to be authentic and I have to have a courage to stand for what's truly in my heart. This is what we mean by leading from the heart. You need to stand for your true core values. Where is the fear potentially that absolutely paralyzes you and prevents you from stepping into that light and stepping into that true authenticity and expression of your true heart, of your true values? I think that full moon will really shine light into that space. And just a little note as well, we haven't touched on that in this episode, but Kimberly, you reminded me about this episode that Venus is already in her pre-shadow and she will be going retrograde. Um, that is also something that I think starts at this full moon with that conversation with Venus and Pluto. And we might be paying more attention to Venus going from Aries back to Pisces and then going to Aries again. So that play of what we need to bring and that frustration, I think this is just the beginning.
I think you're right. I think you're so right. And I love what you were saying. It reminds me of something I heard Brene Brown talk to one time about courage and how courage comes to us from the French language. And the root of it goes back to a word that meant the heart, right? And that we have to, if we're going to have heart, if we're going to live from our heart, we have to have the courage to do. And I'm going to, my tips and tricks is tapping into that idea as well. This idea of to live from my heart means I have to also be open to my emotions, right? This is a moon in Leo. It isn't just Leo, it's the moon. I need to be open to those more unconscious, subconscious, watery, feely, sometimes lifting me up and sometimes overwhelming feelings. And that combined with the fact that the malefics are in water signs and they can actually help us to figure out how to work with these emotions. My tips and tricks is to embrace some water. in your world, in your life. It doesn't mean we have to go take a bath, although that's lovely if that works for you. This could be spend extra time in the shower, get a shower steamer, use some essential oils, right? Get a mister and spray that on yourself. Diffuse something in the room. Invite the energy of water into your body, into your mind, into your space, and allow ourselves to open to receive. Because water, for me, going back to your idea of polarity, for me, water and earth are the receptive signs. It's about being open to receiving. And so, am
Mhm.
I receiving that from spirit? Am I receiving that from my heart? Am I receiving that from that part of myself? If we are aware and consciously present to what we're feeling about any of the things we've mentioned in this episode, any of those things that might be pinging for people who are listening. So maybe you want to focus on power or women or anger or leadership. What do I feel about that? If I'm aware of that beforehand, then I can move forward from a place of authenticity and not be chasing the mirage. So, in whatever way it works for you, embrace some water into your world and just know that this is a sign, a signal that I am opening up to receiving whatever I need to feel, recognize. All right, I guess that's it. So that is our tips and tricks. We'll be back in 2 weeks when we get to talk about the upcoming new moon and the upcoming Venus retrograde, as Monica alluded to. And I cannot imagine an episode on Venus retrograde without Anne Sundell being present. So, Anne, if you're listening, know that we look forward to you being back with us then. Everybody else, take care. Okay. Thank you for joining us in this week's Astro Chat. We hope that you enjoyed the discussion and would love to hear about anything that resonated with you. Keep the conversation going by posting shareable content on our Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube pages. You can also email us at astrochatpodcast@gmail.com. AstroChat is uploaded every 2 weeks on the Saturday before each new and full moon. Look for us on your favorite podcast platform as well as on YouTube. You can support AstroChat and receive exclusive content by donating on our Patreon page. We look forward to chatting with you all again at the next lunation of the moon.